Yeah. Right. And I
Since it is 7 o'clock. No, it's not 7 o'clock. All right, so I call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call? Mrs. Better?
Mayor Bachman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Knudsen?
Here.
Trustee McGinnis? Trustee Stelter?
Here.
Trustee Schwartz? Commissioner Watson? Commissioner Howe?
Here.
Commissioner Explicit?
Here.
Trustee Smith?
Here.
Trustee Valentine?
Okay. Well, I'm going to turn this meeting over to Shay. It is now yours, Shay.
Awesome. Did you have an announcement, Dave?
Yes, I do. On Saturday, March 23rd, from 10:30 to noon at the library, the Fertile Edge Community Land Trust is doing a listening session on the housing action plan and how community land trusts fit into that. So again, it's this Saturday at the library from 10:30 until noon. Thank you.
Awesome. So for those of you I don't know, which you all look pretty familiar, I'm Shay Gober, I'm with Urban Rural Continuum. I am here. We are all here to talk about short-term rentals and accessory dwellings. So thanks for being here. A fun topic. I was hoping the room would be packed because everybody wants to talk about this, but maybe they'll trickle in. Yeah, we'll see some more people. Is anybody online? Okay, great. Great. I will try to not forget that there are people online, but if you guys could help me remember, that would be great. Or just flag me if someone's like raising their hand or trying to talk. Sometimes multitasking is hard. So today we are going to talk about.
I gotta click on her presentation.
Do I point it this way? Am I pressing the wrong button just the forward one?
Okay, try it now.
There we go.
Great, thank you. So the agenda for tonight, we're gonna have a quick presentation from me. I will try to not go on and on, but I do feel like it'll be nice for us to kind of be on the same page and start with the same information. Then we are really going to discuss, I kind of wanted to do this as like a listening session. So less discussion back and forth, but just really try to hear from everyone and get as much input as I can on what you guys, are liking, not liking, what you're afraid of, what you're excited for. And we'll have a lot of time for that. And then we'll talk about next steps, just to be sure everyone kind of knows what we're doing next. Let's see. All right. So a quick background for those of you who don't know already. Urban Rural Continuum did the housing needs assessment and housing action plan. It's completed in November last year. It sounds like there's some continued action on that, which is great. The full document is on the town's website, and then I did include a couple pages, kind of the key pages of what we're talking about tonight in the packet. So those are available in today's packet. We had initially bid on the project of the housing needs assessment and housing action plan. And we proposed an optional add-on saying, hey, town, we would like to do this for you, but you didn't ask for it. But if you want us to do it, we'll do it. So we ended up doing that. And that was drafting proposed code edits for 4 of DOLA's qualifying strategies. So I'm not going to get into what those are, exactly what that means, but 4 kind of topic areas of code edits that the community wanted to talk about. That deliverable was included in your packet as attachment 1. Did most people see the packet? Look at it. Maybe there's some head shaking. Okay. Well, when I'm referencing the packet today, there's everybody.
Yes.
Okay, time, people. All right. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Okay, on your time. I didn't realize. It's awesome. This is great. I'm so glad because I wanted people to be here. So now there's more people. guys for coming. So I was just doing a quick background on what we're going to talk about today and kind of why we're here. So there's some remaining grant funds, and that is now being used to try to implement the plan. So just take the next step to work on that. The focus is mostly working on integrating the needs assessment and action plan into the comprehensive plan that's currently underway. If you don't know that, that is happening. And then really focusing on this short-term rental and ADU regulation piece. Trying to get you guys as far as I can down the road to getting something adopted. That will include 3 total meetings or workshops. So today is the first one of those, and then a couple of revisions to the proposed edits that we're looking at today. So if you're feeling a little bit lost, I'm going to go over what is proposed and what we're kind of talking about. So when I say the attachment from the packet, that's what I'll be talking about. Let's see. If there are remaining funds, if we just happen to fly through this, because everybody agrees on exactly what should be done in this meeting, if there's time, we'll talk about the expedited review process as well as small dwellings. And those are the other 2 items that are addressed in that attachment in the packet. So we won't really be getting into those tonight, but if there's time, we'll get into them at another time. All right, so why are we talking about short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units? 1, because it's super fun and exciting, and everybody always agrees. No, in all seriousness, these were the 2 top items identified in the Housing Action Plan as the items to start now. They felt like kind of the low-hanging fruit, something that the community could do without a ton of grant funds, without a massive effort, and actually feel like you're starting to chip away at this affordable housing issue. There was a huge desire as we talked through this housing action plan to do something. Please start something now. There is an issue with affordable housing now, and we really want to work on it. Keep in mind, there's no one solution to affordable housing. That's just not a thing, but if anybody ever figures it out, you will be very successful. But this is something that you can do to chip away at it. It's something you can do to help. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight and why we're here to talk about it. I will mention I would kind of think we're past talking about if we want to regulate short-term rentals or if we want to allow for ADUs. What the plan discovered is we do want to regulate short-term rentals and we do want to allow for accessory dwelling units. So the conversation tonight is really centered around how. Let's start fleshing out those details of exactly what that looks like and get something in place. It's not that you can't share that you don't want to regulate something, but I'm just sharing that that's kind of where this conversation is starting from, is we are going to regulate short-term rentals as a community and we are somehow going to allow accessory dwelling units. Kind of a side note, there's some proposed legislation going on at the state level that may require communities to allow for accessory dwelling units. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we have this discussion. You could maybe say we don't want to do it, but that may not be an option in the future. And my hope is that through these couple of meetings, through some good discussion and input, that we can get an ordinance together by that last meeting for the town board to consider. If not, that's fine. You guys can talk about this as a community for as long as you want to. But I am here to try to help, try to lend a professional, opinion, what I've seen, what I've heard, to help just facilitate that conversation. So keep that in mind. We could talk about this forever. You guys can talk about it forever as a community. Nobody ever gets it perfectly right. Code kind of feels like it's written in stone. It's not. You can always come back, adjust, and change as you need to if something really comes up. So all that to say, I'm just here to try to encourage you guys to get somewhere and get something adopted. I know that's what the board and the planning commission has expressed previously, and a lot of members of the public as well. Let's see, we did talk to, throughout our housing action plan process, we did talk to a lot of the community and our housing task force about these proposed regulations. So know that what I'm presenting today is informed with public input. It's not totally me just coming up with something from nowhere. I think you have to click out of that for me to click next slide. Sorry, Sam. I was like, so much to manage.
Trustee Valentine joined this one.
Okay, good. So a few things to keep in mind as we are having this conversation tonight. There were some themes included in the plan that just kind of kept coming up. And the top one was trying to focus on locals. So as we craft regulations, as we have these discussions, the idea is that we really want to benefit locals more than we want to benefit like out-of-town property owners or out-of-town businesses. The focus is really on locals. Try to kind of minimize the alteration of town's character, keep that character that seemed important to the community in general. And then the third one, while the water moratorium's in place, get these rules established. So there's some thoughts or opinions of we don't need to be talking about this. There's a water moratorium in place. Let's get that sorted before we do anything else. That really feels like a missed opportunity. This is a time where you can get your house in order, have these discussions and be ready when or if that moratorium lifts, and you can be prepared for that. The fourth recurring theme was just talking about the town's capacity. So you guys know the town's capacity is limited. There aren't funds for unlimited staff people and time and projects. And just try to regulate what's most important and keep it simple. We heard a lot of comments of, well, we don't understand the town's rules or the town's not enforcing them clearly or fairly. That starts with having good, clear rules. It's really hard to enforce rules that don't make sense in the code. It's really hard for the public to understand rules that don't make sense or they're too complicated. So that's another theme of, let's really try to keep it simple. If you guys as a community feel like you need to add some details later and tweak some things later that may add some complication, wait and see how this works simply and then consider doing it. Another focus is really we're talking about affordable housing. So I know these topics can get in a lot of different areas. Short-term rental talks a lot about or has to do a lot with economic development stuff. ADUs is, really a land use thing or density thing that it gets complicated, but just try to remember this whole discussion is really coming up because the community has a bit of an affordable housing challenge and the community really wants to do something about that. So that's a little bit of the base of our conversation. Again, community members really wanted action. We wanted to see something happen, see some progress being made. And the idea of what I'm hoping to facilitate here is get the input, get the community to discuss and provide input, but ultimately it's your elected and appointed officials that need to make this decision for the community. And that's the hard part and cool part about what you guys do is that you are empowered to decide what you feel is best for the community and move forward that way. I have done, I think, a pretty careful job of trying to consider all of these different considerations, all of the different community input, but we're here tonight to go over that and discuss that and hopefully fine tune that with what you guys have to say. So we'll jump right in. I'm going to talk about short-term rentals first, and I'm going to talk about kind of what they are, and then the proposed regulations. And then I'm going to talk about accessory dwelling units, what they are, and the proposed regulations. I am thinking it's best to just try to get through this and absorb what you can and ask questions kind of when I conclude that presentation. Does that work okay for you guys? Okay, but do write down your questions or take a note on your phone if you're thinking of something while I'm talking that you want to talk about. So a short-term rental. Sometimes these are called vacation rentals, Airbnb, VRBO. I'm sure there's other terms I'm forgetting. They are typically defined as the use of a dwelling unit or portion of a dwelling unit as a residential rental on a short-term basis, which is typically defined as 30 days or less. This does not include hotels, motels, lodging facilities, rooming houses, bed and breakfast. Those are different uses that are regulated differently. That definition can vary, so we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide, but just to give you an idea of generally what a short-term rental is, it's really about the use of a dwelling unit. So it's not necessarily the building type, it's the use of a dwelling unit. There is a little confusion because your current code in the definition of a dwelling unit says something about like how long it can be rented out. That's one of those examples of a really hard code to enforce. Something in a definition doesn't really feel like a rule. People don't look there for the rules. You just don't put regulations in definitions. So the idea is that we would clean that up with this effort. So thinking about the use of a dwelling unit, a short-term rental could take place in a multifamily building, like in an apartment complex. It could take place in a condo complex. It could be a single-family house. It could be one side of a duplex. Whatever is considered a dwelling unit, a short-term rental, the dwelling unit could be used as a short-term rental. Generally, communities don't allow short-term rentals to take place like in a tent in your yard or in your RV or in your garage or barn. There's safety concerns for that. So if you're gonna, as a community, permit people to stay on a short-term basis as they would in a hotel or bed and breakfast or something, you want them in a proper dwelling unit, not in a converted garage that may not have the egress and smoke detectors and basic safety functions that a dwelling unit have. So the proposed regulations, and you guys tell me if I'm going too fast on this. I feel like there's a bit to absorb here, but I'll try to kind of go through methodically and explain. The first proposal here is to define the short-term rental, the same as what I just kind of explained. So the rental of all or a portion of a dwelling unit for 30 or fewer days. Again, not including hotels, lodging facilities, bed and breakfast, things like that. Some communities choose not to regulate the rental of a portion of a dwelling unit. So that is more like the one bedroom in your dwelling unit. You can, on the like Airbnb platforms or VRBO, you can say, I'm just renting a room in my house or 2 rooms in my house. Some communities decide that's kind of more like couch surfing or having a guest, and they decide not to regulate that and have that be something separate. The proposal that I have in place now, I think mostly for keeping things simple, is count all of them. If someone's renting just a room, if someone's renting a whole house, just count it. That keeps it clean and easy, but we can also have that discussion, obviously, and I'd love some input on that. Let's see. Some communities just decide that they will kind of regulate them with the basics, but they decide that they won't count them towards other things. So maybe the fee for the license is less. Maybe it doesn't count towards the maximum number of licenses allowed. The rental of one room tends to have a lot less impact on a community. So if I'm just renting one room in my house, I'm probably there. I'm letting the person in or out. I'm controlling where they're parking. I'm putting the trash out. I'm making sure it's not noisy because I want to go to sleep. So those generally do have a little less impact on the community and therefore are sometimes regulated separately. The second big kind of picture regulation is putting a cap on the total number of short-term rentals allowed in town. And that would be through requiring a license through the town. So someone would come to town hall and apply for that license, and there would be a cap on that total number. The cap that we have proposed is 30. That's close to what exists today, or at least when we did our report, mid last year. The idea with setting that number close to what exists today is you are not taking away anyone's existing kind of use. That can be really sensitive for someone. You know, they put a bunch of money into trying to set up their short-term rental, and all of a sudden that's taken away. And that can get really complicated and controversial and kind of hard to regulate. So the kind of path of least resistance is set it near what you think it is, and then you won't have to have that complicated discussion. It also would kind of stop the bleeding per se, like you wouldn't be allowing more. You would be saying, that's it. That's what we're doing. If you want to revisit the number later and reduce it later or add more regulations later, that would be an option to do that. Licenses also, if you make them non-transferable, it means that if someone sells the house, the unit, they don't go to the next buyer. So it's not like a commodity that you could market the house as, this is my business. You can short-term rent it. You can make all this money off of it and then encourage someone from out of town to buy that business, essentially. You would, it would not transfer. So until someone owns the dwelling unit, then they get a license. This is, it kind of helps it helps discourage outside investors. So if you get the call as, you know, the town staff person that says, hey, could I get a license? I have this house under contract, or I'm looking at it. And you say, nope, you have to get in line and you have to have the deed in order to apply for that license. And they have 30 days until closing, and, you know, 95% of the licenses are already taken. They might back out of that investment. They might say, never mind, that's not worth it to me. It also helps just a town license not be this commodity that's then bought and sold for, you know, profit. It just stays. Licenses also help ensure that appropriate taxes are submitted. So currently, short-term rentals should be submitting sales tax and lodging tax. And that is really hard to track if you don't even know who's doing it. So often the licensing process will say, you've registered for your sales tax, you've registered for your lodging tax, or whatever is required. And sometimes you have to submit reports that you've done that, or at least the person who's collecting those taxes kind of has you on their list and is aware of that. A kind of a side note here, we did hear some desire for the community to consider taxing short-term rentals. That I have left out of this conversation. That's kind of a big deal, especially as a statutory town. You guys are limited with what you can add taxes to. So my suggestion is put some regulations in place. Talk about the taxing discussion next. Put that on your list once you can get these rules in place. There is also some legislation on the table at the state level to tax short-term rentals as commercial property. So if that passes, that would probably take care of a lot of those concerns and help with that revenue. So something to track while that is, you know, on the table. You would, with the license, you would set a license fee. So the idea would be that fee would cover the cost to administer this licensing program. So, you know, a couple hours of staff time to review the paperwork, some time to pay an inspector to come out and make sure that you meet the rules that exist and that you guys put in place, some hours for tracking, and that would be what the license fee would cover as your administrative costs. You can't set a license fee that is considered a tax or something above and beyond what it takes to administer the program. But it can be helpful because, yes, you're adding work for the town to do, but maybe those extra fees can pay for, you know, someone part-time or another day, or help fund another whole staff person that could do other stuff. The third bullet there is allow short-term rentals in all zoning districts. Some communities set by zone where they want to allow these. I don't feel it's really necessary here. I think that just gets more complicated. And then you have discussions on what's fair and why. If I have, you know, a dwelling unit in this zone versus a dwelling unit in this zone, why does it matter which one I'm doing? So the proposal is that the cap would address how many you could do in town. No need to also complicate it by zone. I've also heard some, we have this discussion, I think at the task force group, so maybe it wasn't. But there are some communities that regulate by density. So like Durango allows 1 per block. It's an interesting approach, but it's really hard to make that fair. Who gets that 1 per block? How do you decide? And does that person hold on to it forever? Or like, are the neighbors then paying their neighbor to be like, no, I want in on that. You give it, like, you submit yours and I'll go submit my application. It makes it hard to regulate. So in a town this size with a cap, it seems like regulating kind of per block or per zone is just not necessary. It's not simple. It's not fair always. So try to just say it's allowed in all zones. The next bullet, these kind of relate. So parking would be required per the requirements today. So if you're renting a single family residential unit and your code says you need 2 parking spaces per that single family residential unit, that would need to be checked and proven as part of your license. If you have a multifamily and that requires 1 space, that would be checked. So just no extra parking, but whatever that dwelling unit requires today, it has to exist. This happens because how many of us fill up our garages with like toys and stuff? And then you actually don't have off-street parking. And this is a kind of a big neighbor concern that all of a sudden the short-term rental comes in with 3 cars and they're parking in front of your house. They're blocking your driveway as the neighbor. It's kind of frustrating. So the checking parking is one of those basic kind of neighborly items to take care of. Same with having requiring short-term rentals to have smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, adequate trash, and a clearly posted address. These are kind of the basic health and safety items that you as a community would likely be interested in putting in place so that visitors can be safe. They can, if they call 911, they're not like, where am I? What is my address? They think to walk right outside the door, and it is right by the door, as most people handle this. That can be a really bad publicity thing for a community. So I think we had talked to the housing task force. I'm sorry, you guys, if I'm not totally remembering it right. Okay, good. But we had talked about other potential safety things to regulate, and it was like, let's keep it basic. Let's not go overboard, but some very basic safety items feel really important. Let's put those in there. And then the last one, having the owner's agent. The owner or their agent residing or conducting business within 15 miles of town. So this one's kind of an interesting approach that communities are taking. The idea is that you have someone to respond to complaints. So, the trash gets pulled out, a raccoon gets in it, and there's trash all over the block. But nobody's there because it's not rented out for a week and nobody's paying attention. And you as the neighbor have to go pick up the trash because it's all over your yard. Not cool, right? So the idea is you'd have an owner, or they would have to hire an agent. Sometimes people use real estate agents, other property management companies, someone who can be responsible and respond to concerns, issues, problems that arise. A couple other things on this short-term rental regulations. We did hear some desire to only let locals have short-term rentals. I think the intent of that is really good because it fits with that benefit locals first approach. The hard part is it's really cumbersome to administer. So do you require that someone live here a certain amount of days? Do you require it be their primary residence? How are you doing that? Are you sending Stefan every couple of days to go knock on someone's door and say, are you living here? Yeah. It's really hard to enforce. So the idea with a license cap, again, you have a maximum allowed. If it happens to be some out-of-town people and some in-town people, it's what it is. Hopefully you guys as in-town people and locals would kind of know the scoop, right? You're already here. You know this conversation is happening. Maybe you'd be the first people to walk in the door to get your application in. You'd kind of know what's going on. So I don't feel like that is a necessary item, or really it's just too cumbersome to deal with. And then there are some other edits we would need to do to the code to address this. Those are in that attachment 1, but I'm not going to get into that because I am here to be your code person, and not stress you guys out with, cleanup of other items. Okay, that was very long. So accessory dwelling units. Typically defined as a dwelling.
Is it possible to comment on each section as we go through it? Because that's present, is
So
that possible or not?
we could, we just have this one more topic and they're a little interrelated. And what I was hoping to do is literally go around the room and hear from everybody. So maybe write your notes. Does that work okay? Okay.
Good.
I know it's a lot to digest. So ADUs, dwelling units that are clearly incidental and subordinate to a primary dwelling unit and located on the same property. So not a neighboring property, but the same piece of property that single family house is on. They're often smaller. They're often rented at more affordable prices just because they are smaller. And this is about density. So I listened to the last planning commission meeting. There was a little confusion about short-term rentals and ADUs. Short-term rentals are about use of dwelling units. This is talking about allowing more density in existing neighborhoods. You guys already have some zone districts that allow 2 dwelling units on a parcel, like R2 and R3. So it would not quite be the same as like having a duplex on an R2 lot, but it would be very similar in that there are 2 dwelling units on one piece of property. So the proposed regulations define accessory dwelling unit, as I just said. It could be freestanding, attached, within the principal dwelling unit. It can vary. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. It is a full dwelling unit. So it is a unit with provisions for eating, sleeping, living, sanitation. That's kind of your classic building code definition, and it would stick with that. So if you have an extra master bedroom that just has a bathroom on it, but no kitchen, that's not an accessory dwelling unit. That can cause complications because some people will be like, I'm not building an ADU. And the building inspector leaves and they install like a little mini kitchen, like, a hotel might have. So it's complicated, but no matter what, people are going to try to get around regulations either way. So you just do it as clean and easy as you can. The idea would be to allow 1 accessory dwelling unit per every single family house. So not to duplexes, not to multifamily houses, just to a single family house. That helps with density concerns often. You guys can definitely allow it to more than just a single family house if you want to. But this is kind of the clean and easy proposal or approach. The third bullet there, the property owner must occupy the principal or accessory dwelling unit and not rent both. This is an interesting provision. So the task force, I think, was a little split on this one. It can really encourage out-of-town investors, right? So if someone wants to buy a property just as an investment property and rent both, even if they rented them long-term, that wouldn't be allowed with this provision. So it can actually discourage people from buying a property because they say, oh, never mind, I don't want to make that investment because I'm not going to live there. However, you need rentals. So is it that bad that someone from out of town owns a property with 2 rentals and rents both? That's up to you guys to decide. It does tend to reduce some like neighborly nuisances if the property owner is there. So what some communities decide is, hey, if we're gonna allow this increased density, like we're gonna allow a whole other dwelling unit on these properties, we want the owner of that property to be there because we wanna make sure the trash isn't spread all over, the noise isn't crazy, the sidewalks are shoveled, some basic stuff. So there's a little balance there. 800 square foot maximum floor area. You guys can modify that as you wish. 800 square feet is a really nice amount of space. Even for a small family, I live in 747. It's more than I really need, and it's super easy to clean. So it makes it nice. Much larger than that stops feeling like accessory. It feels like a main house. Some communities do it by like percent of the main house, but then what happens if that house gets expanded or made smaller? It's just more complicated. Just put a number in there. It keeps it clean and simple. you would comply with the adopted building code setbacks, height requirements. So you wouldn't have different setbacks, you wouldn't have different height requirements. You could build on that property what you could build today with your single family. Provide one off-street parking space in addition to the principal dwelling unit. So right now, I believe single family homes require 2 parking spaces. Am I remembering that right? Go with it.
Yeah.
That's pretty traditional. And 1 extra off-street parking space would be required. That is generally neighbors with increased density don't want people parking in front of their house. We all think we own the public street in front of our house. We don't, it's public property, but we feel like we should be parking there, not the neighbors. So this helps kind of curb that concern. The design meeting the principal dwelling unit. Some communities don't care about that. Some do. It's kind of best practice. It helps it feel like it fits in a little bit and feels a little bit less impactful. That's why I put that in here. Let's see, the ADU could be built on the lot before the principal dwelling unit. So what you would do, or what someone could do, is buy a lot. They're a young family. They don't have the money to build their dream house, but they have the money to build an 800 square foot house. They would build it in compliance with your accessory dwelling unit regulations at the time in which they or subsequent owners could build the main house. That house, the house they initially built, could be converted into the accessory dwelling unit. That's kind of a cool way to go. It allows people to get into the housing market in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been able to get into it because they didn't want to just build that tiny house because then it would restrict the lot from being built on more profitably later. So that's kind of a nice option that benefits locals. Let's see, a couple other items that aren't on here. Some communities say that if we're allowing for this increased density in ADUs, no ADUs can be used as short-term rentals. That's possible. I personally felt that if you guys have a cap on the total number, again, it doesn't matter. You have 30 in town or whatever number you decide. Does it matter if it's in an ADU? Does it matter if it's in the primary? Does it matter if it's in that zone or this building? Cap it, and you don't have to get that complicated. So that's what this proposal is. Keep in mind that this often feels really kind of scary to people, like, wait, every single family house could have an ADU. That will like double our density. Well, it could eventually, but I don't know. I'm guessing a lot of people in here live in a single family house. Yeah, who's ready to build an accessory dwelling unit on that lot right now? Yeah. If you have water. Sorry, we're not talking about water here. So all that to say, this happens really slowly and over time. There can be sometimes a little boom where people get interested and build them, but it does. It happens generally a lot more slowly than it feels like it could happen. We did a major effort in Ridgeway to promote ADUs, try to get them built. We were teaming with the bank. I mean, we were doing everything we could to get them built. We got 7 in a year. So it's, that's with a lot of efforts. So just keep in mind that if you do allow these, it's really not going to happen overnight. And if it does, that could be a really good thing for your housing market and being able to house locals and work towards that goal of having affordable. Okay, we are talking about water a little bit. So with another dwelling unit, you do have to talk about taps. The proposed code edits only talk about that you would need to use the same physical tap as the main house. The reason for that is generally towns don't like lots of taps. Every tap that's made to a water main is a potential for a leak, an issue. It compromises your main. So the idea is physically the tap would be the same. And I am gonna squeak my way out of talking about the water tap moratorium by saying tap fees, like tapping in fees and use fees, are not really part of this land use discussion. It is something that we would need to talk about, and you guys would want to get in place, and we can definitely get into it. I just don't want it to really detract from the discussion of, where do we allow them? How do we allow them? Let's talk about what we want as a community for the accessory dwelling units, and then let's get into what do we charge for this? What looks good? Some communities decide to really incentivize accessory dwelling units, communities that really need affordable housing, by saying, we're not charging a tap fee for an accessory unit, or we're going to charge a percent of a tap fee. Some communities just charge full price because it's another dwelling unit, and if all dwelling units have to pay for it, then this dwelling unit does. And some communities do something different with their use fees, so their monthly fees sometimes can be reduced or they can be full. That's something that you guys will have to decide as a community of what to do there. Okay, so now I will stop talking. And what I was thinking is I really want to hear from everyone. We have about an hour and 10 minutes and a lot of people in the room. What I was hoping is we could spend a bit of time getting public input, save some time for you guys to then give your input. And then I could kind of wrap up. Does that work okay with you guys for the workshop? Okay. How much time do you think we should leave? I probably need like 5 minutes to wrap up at the end. How much time do you guys think we need for this group up here? 1, 2, 6, 7, 8.
Same restriction as a public, 3 minutes apiece, so maybe 20 minutes, half hour at the most.
Okay. So then we have about like 50 minutes for the public. Thanks, Stefan. So what I was hoping we could do, you guys, is really try to be succinct so we can hear from everyone. We also are I'm going to take written comments. So if you're not a public speaker, just don't feel comfortable or you haven't formulated your thoughts yet, you don't need to speak. But what I was hoping is we could hear from everyone and not really get into much of a back and forth. I'm happy to answer a question if you have like a direct question about how something works or that, but I'm really hoping that we can all listen to each other. And that the next meeting, if we need to have more discussion or go back and forth, we can do that if it works. But I feel like there's so much to get out and everyone's so excited to talk about this topic that we need to give everyone that time. So I think, is it appropriate to come up and speak, or is it okay that people speak from their chairs? How's the audio for the owls?
These pick up everything. So the owls, the microphones will pick up anything.
So people can stay seated if they want to. Can we just start somewhere? I'll ask for a volunteer to start and then just kind of go in a row. And if you want to skip, you can skip. Does that work okay?
I can start.
Are you ready for starting?
Sure.
And great. And I think, what did you set the timer for?
3 minutes.
Okay.
I think my feedback is mostly around the short-term rentals. I think preserving the status quo of 30 homes, like I understand not wanting to ruffle the feathers of the people that currently have that, but it's not taking into account your constituents that are currently dealing with a housing crisis. So we're saying there are many people that are looking for homes, and our solution is to preserve the status quo, which is a housing crisis in and of itself. So a compromise there would be maybe 15 homes, putting some homes back into the thing. So it's like just the people that are renting out homes should not be the consideration. A larger consideration than people's pockets that are profiting off of the lack of homes to rent would be to consider the people who are looking for permanent housing here and for rental housing. That's my feedback.
Thank you.
Can I clarify one thing?
Yeah.
Can we get names as well?
Peter McCarthy.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Hi, Jeff Thompson. I live on Box Elder. One of the issues that is related is the out-of-town ownership. We have a vacancy, home vacancy issue. And so I think I'll just leave it at that. That's something we need to address because we have a lot of houses sitting empty that could be used as rentals or residences. I think there's an issue with grandfathering that needs to be addressed with this as well. There's a lot of houses, old houses that have external buildings that may fit the definition, but may not maybe meet all of the code requirements because of the age of the structures.
For ADUs, sorry, just a clarification for ADUs specifically.
Yeah, for ADUs, thank you. I think we should address long-term rentals. And as a part of this discussion, because we do have a housing crisis happening and we're losing residents. And I think it would be great if we could find a way to incentivize long-term rentals in this process. Perhaps a tax on short-term rentals that would create some kind of affordable housing assistance program or something like that. Two last things. I think that the community needs, we just need to recognize that the community needs could trump individual needs. And that's what we're really striving for in this process. And I think there's also an issue that certain properties, because of setbacks, may not really be able to comply with the construction of an ADU. So there might need to be some kind of assessment as to which properties actually could meet that requirement of coding.
Yeah, I am Skyrix. I think that this family encompasses a lot of the comments that I've heard over the series of master planning meetings, and I want to say thank you to Jay because there are plans that have been very critical, and I feel like this represents the community very well. That's first, and I also second Pete's feeling that we do need to stop the bleeding, and 30 short-term rentals in a small town is probably too high, and maybe you address that just by implementing, just regulate that they have to apply for. If you implement that and you see who the takers are very quickly, and you have a guideline that we want to decrease that to 15, or we want to decrease that to 20. And so as people time out or don't fulfill that you don't automatically renew it that number of 30. Because 30 is very high for a small town. I probably have a lot of things that I could say, but I didn't keep notes. Also, this, when I looked on a website, I could see pages that describe conversations coming to this point, but the actual pages of what you're suggesting to do about it next are not available there. So just to make like the action plan also available online for people to have.
Thank you.
My name is Sam Cow. I just had a couple of questions, and I know we might not be able to address them potentially to mind. You said that it might be difficult to require that the owner of a short-term rental or potentially an ADU as well would be a local, but you also in there mentioned that you could potentially require the owner, the agent to live within 50 miles. Those two things don't necessarily seem that different. So if you couldn't require it to be a local, but you could somehow require them to live within 50 miles, it you know, it seems like there would be a way to do that. The only other thing is figuring out a way to grandfather in or to waive fees or do something to encourage existing ADUs that are already out there and not legal to become legal, and you know, some sort of a forgiveness program or something to get them on the books and keep them get them regulated, getting taxed, that kind of thing once they're available, but also not find people that already have existing houses out there who might, you know, potentially take those things off of the rental market if they were required to pay fees.
I just want to say thank you for your presentation and
I'm gonna keep thinking on it and maybe submit something. Thank you, Kathy. Shay, you did a wonderful job. Good creative solutions for a creative community.
Marlene Ehrenberger. I guess my focus would be the item where you said they had to conduct business within 15 miles. I take that to mean someone could live in Idaho and not be local. I would like to focus on local.
Hey, thanks, Shay, Patty Keach. I would like to not see, STR, short-term rentals, in single-family residential neighborhoods at all, because of the noise impact. There are not people that live in the community, it's loud on the weekends. Extra cars. Depending on the size of the house, there could be several cars, right? There's a few very large short-term rentals in town. And then my other thing on the ADUs, like when do you expect something like that to be implemented? I mean, people have been doing it for years, even during this moratorium. And so no one's inspecting them. Like I know of some bedrooms that don't have egress windows, for example. And yeah, like somebody just mentioned having some sort of forgiveness program so we can at least go in there to say, hey, look, put a window well in for the bedrooms.
Actually, thank you. Molly Wheelock, I live on Monarga. On STRs, I think I'd have to agree that I'd like to see a smaller cap, although I appreciate trying to acknowledge what people have put into some of their STRs. I think I'd like to see the cap not include renting out a room in your own home if you live there. Although I think it still needs to be licensed and taxed appropriately, benefit the town and what that takes on. And I like the idea of affordable housing tax, although I'm not a fan of stacking more and more fees on top of it, but I like that that goes towards some incentivizing for affordable housing. On ADUs, I think if we're going to have a cap, I think that STRs are just allowed where they're allowed. So I don't know that we need to say that they can't be in an ADU if we already have a cap. Or if there's other things in place to regulate where they are. And it seems like owner occupied within an, in order to have an ADU, which is not an STR, just an ADU, it seems prohibitive that the owner must also live in the main house. It seems like it should be allowed that if we need housing, we can rent both of those structures. Yeah, that's my feedback at the moment.
Hi, I'm Jess, Durbin Ackerman. Thanks, Jay. Great job. I really appreciated also reading all of your notes in the packet and like all the possibilities. And the one thing that I appreciated that I'd love to see us investigate here is really leaning into like a East Local campaign. I can't remember exactly where you said did that, but I think that doing incentivizing property owners to rent long-term to folks people who are in the community and need housing. That is something I'd like to see us investigate further. Also, I was listening to what Molly was saying and was thinking that if in the situation where we don't have owner occupied with an ADU in a main house, if somebody doesn't, and maybe it's something like either you live on site or the owner or agent is within 15 miles, like take that same regulation from the short-term rentals and put that on a property that doesn't have an owner living there for an ADU. So even for long-term rentals, it's only if you have an agent or an owner that lives within 15 miles of town. But otherwise you did a great job and I'm really excited about this. And I also agree on lowering the cap. I don't want to take away anybody's business that they've invested in, and at the same time, really feeling personally and within my community here, the housing crisis and need for more additional housing.
And I was looking at the short-term rental. It excludes motels, hotels, lodging facilities. And I was wondering, lodging facilities, what does that include?
Yeah, we could look at exactly what your code already defines. Some communities define lodging facilities, and that includes a motel, a hotel, a bed and breakfast. It's just kind of different terms that the community uses. So whatever terms those are, it's similar to a hotel, a motel, a bed and breakfast. You guys have a hostel here in town, so like a lodging facility would include a hostel. It's basically including everything that is already formalized as a kind of commercial rental use. Does that make sense? Okay.
Well, I am here today because I have 2 short-term rentals. And the main one was our family home. And I've done this since 2012. I rented this particular house full-time in the past. Had many nightmares. I have not found it is such a wonderful way to use my property. And the people who come appreciate it. And I don't have the problems I used to have. And I also use it for family, SEI instructors and students. And so I'm here, just checking this out, wondering regulations, how much more are we going to have our government intruding on, what I've done for years and been very successful at. So that's basically what I'm here for, is to see what these regulations are all about.
Behind, my name is Kay Howell, and I think overall, I wasn't here for the STRs, so I don't know anything about that, but as far as the ADUs, I think there's like a few nuances that would need to be kind of figured out, because like there are people that come here and just work for the summer season, help with farms, and so there may be people that are only looking for a place for 6 months or something like that. And then as far as the ownership, like, if the owner has to live on site, well, like, what if they're gonna like go to school and go away for a year, or they have some kind of health crisis or something like that? And so you have these kind of things that, like, how do you deal with those types of situations?
Thank you. Hi, Marissa Milner. Thanks, Kay. I liked what you just said. I'm also in favor of reducing the cap on licenses. I think it would be a big win, a big boost overall for our community to see a little bit of easing in the long-term rental market, because right now, whenever anyone loses their lease, who you're close to, you just really know that they're gonna have a hard time, and you really are in that struggle. So I'd love to see some of those houses go back into long-term. I also really appreciated what Jeff said, just bringing awareness to the issue of second and also corporate entities, second home ownership, corporate entities owning homes. I'm thinking like hedge funds. There's a lot of activity around that right now. The state of Colorado has a task force on corporate home ownership. I'm trying to learn as much as I can. That's not what we're covering, which is presencing that for the future. And overall, I'd like to see us disincentivize folks who are not locals purchasing properties for STRs or investment properties, but I do appreciate what you said, there needs to be some flexibility there. And I'm curious when we will talk about enforcement, because I feel like a lot of this does come down to enforcement. Is that in a future session, Shay?
No, I mean, I think that's really part of the discussion today, is we need to balance, what we're regulating with what we have the ability to enforce.
Oh, and also I have this white paper on enforcement if anyone wants to have it. I didn't write
Just
it.
a white
but
paper.
It's really good.
White reading.
It wasn't too bad, it was a quick.
Nice. Is there someone next to you?
Oh, yeah, hi, I'm Aaron Watson, I'm representing Dark Skies Paonia. I want to talk a little about how these regulations are going to impact our dark skies here, because, you know, when we're looking at density increases, we have a lighting ordinance here for the town of Paonia. So I'm curious how, you know, if we're increasing density, because we have lumen density caps in our lighting ordinance, so there's lumen limits, and it's broken down into single family, multifamily. So I'm curious how, if we're adding more density, how this is gonna impact the ordinance, the lighting ordinance. And included in that is kind of what Patty said as well, you know, with short-term rentals, a lot of times it is outsiders coming in and they're not necessarily aware of the culture here of preserving the night sky. So I would really like to see, you know, in these regulations, a link to the lighting ordinance so that, you know, short-term rental owners know that there is an ordinance in place, and that, you know, that's important to educate the people coming in on how to use light responsibly, keep our night skies dark so we can all enjoy that. And it's called, you know, the term that is called light trespass. And there's, you know, there's a lot of places starting to crack down on that across the state. So I just want to make sure that that's included here. And that's really important because, you know, we've seen it a lot that as more people come in, you start to lose the night sky if we don't protect it. So just really want to make sure we're taking every chance we can to protect this amazing resource we have here.
Shay, before we go to the side, we do have one hand raised online.
Okay. How many people do we have online?
Two.
Two, okay.
Three of them.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, great. So I'm Michelle Pattison. I'm going to submit most of my comments in writing, but someone was mentioning definitions, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention that we do have a definition of a bed and breakfast and of a boarding or rooming house in our code, but we do not have a definition of hotel in our current code. So I do think we'll have to take a look at those definitions, and my recommendation would be to look at our the International Building Code that we've adopted and use their definitions for that. Thanks.
Do you want to do the other folks online while we're talking if they want to speak?
Sure. So Carrie, and we also have Carrie Soto, and then also have our trustee John Valentine.
Okay, we'll save John for later.
Carrie, do you have anything to add?
Okay. Can we just hop across the aisle there in the back? Sorry, I can't really make eye contact with you. Thank you.
I'll stand up. My name is David Merrick. I live in the town of Paonia. I also own a rental house. I've rented it short-term, long-term. What I'm concerned about here is, you know, the town of Paonia recently sent a letter to BLM in order to protect their tourist industry, what they describe as the growing tourist industry. Well, you don't have, the tourist industry needs the short-term rentals. That's the problem, because there isn't enough available housing when these tourists come through. In the summer, when you start talking about cherry days, BMW rally, Harvest Festival, picnic in the park, picnic at the Paradise, you got delicious orchards with music every weekend. That's where the demand is. And the reason that the STRs are popular is because there's a demand. If you limit the number or try to restrict them too much, you're going to have a negative impact on this tourist economy. That's what my concern would be. And let's face it,
Excuse me.
You have a sales tax is your major source of revenue. So if you cut back on the short-term rentals or try to limit them too much, I think you're going to have a negative impact on your economy. Now, I don't deny that there's a housing crisis, and that's here and a lot of other places, and I can be sympathetic to that. But I would be very careful about, you know, ramping down on the tourist economy.
My name is Lori Merrick, and I too share a home. Dave and I share a home that we've done short-term rental and long-term rental. And I also co-host 4 other STRs. One is out of city limits, and then 3 others are in city limits, and ours is city limits. And I share the same opinion with him about tourism, and I really do believe that STRs support tourism. SCI has like 10 different weeks that they need housing. They come to STRs to support that. Blue Sage has numerous concerts up on the schedule. They also seek out STRs. We try to work with them. And then, you know, not only the people that are coming into our town, loving it, also taking advantage of the beauty and the, you know, all that this town has to offer. They love it. They, I mean, people are coming in for family reunions. People are coming in for weddings. People are coming in to take advantage of our, you know, the wineries and the farm to table. And I haven't, and I've done this for a couple of years now, but I have not had one report of, from a neighbor that, you know, the people are up late, the people are up partying. We're not a college town. And so we can't compare us to Durango or any other college town. And I really feel like people come in here and they want to learn about our culture, they want to respect it. And that's been the experience that I've had so far with STR.
Right in front of her. Allison Elliott. Let's see. I think that we should allow, or the single room or the room within a homeowner's house not be regulated. And I also think the cap could be lowered. While I agree that short-term rentals are good for the tourist town, but I don't want to live, my priority is not making this a tourist town. My priority is making this a real town, the people who live here first, and maybe it will stimulate some creation of other kinds of accommodations for visitors. But we need housing for people who live and work here year-round. And I am very curious about getting to the point where those, I think the short-term rentals should be licensed, and perhaps in the future, we will be able to actually have income, you know, from them through the state legislation or a future taxation regime or something. I think that's important because it's a business. And let's see, ADUs, wow, interesting stuff. I would hate to see coverage of a lot with just buildings. So perhaps we can talk about percentage of footprint on the lot or something like that as a way to not make it all building, you know, with a, maybe if the owner is not living there, one has to be a long-term rental and one has to be, you know, they can't both be a short-term rental, something like that. But I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this presentation, all the thought. And yeah, thank you.
Hi there, I'm Laura Carroll. I own the Rose House over at Second and Main. Shane, thank you. You guys have been working on this for so long. I try and hit as many of them as I can, just can't get them all. I just have a couple quick things that I want to talk about. First of all, I agree that there needs to be some cap. And I think we're probably a little high right now. I have friends who own STRs and I understand what I'm saying to them in their business model, and I wish everybody to thrive. But a community only thrives if the people who operate said community have somewhere to live. Right now, we are off balance. Again, fully in favor of capitalism, all of those things, but if we can't keep people living here, then nobody's coming here because we have nobody to operate our restaurants and we have nobody to do all of these other things. So while I hear people saying that they are concerned that they are going to lose some of their income if we cap, we're going to lose all of our income if we don't have people who can actually live here. The other thing I do want to draw attention to is I live next door to an Airbnb and it's shady. She is doing multiple rooms by the room. She is doing multiple levels. There are times that people who don't know each other would have the opportunity to be living in a house next to me. And you know, that sounds like a hotel to me. And it seems to me if we're going to continue with STR, we need to have some sort of regulation about how many strangers can be living in a house at the same time. This is not the real world. Thank you.
I'm Trill. I'm trying to live in town again. I have to deal with this at here points. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of good ideas, both from Shay, you know, a lot of the work I read. I made it through most of the plan. The executive summary is beautiful. Thank you. And so, yeah, I do think that a lot of it kind of, I'm agreeing with, we need to enrich the local community through, you know, these things, whether that's providing long-term income for somebody to buy a house as an investment, you know, and then rent it out to a community member long-term. I think that's the sort of behavior that we want to try and incentivize in some way. It's like, you know, people who are able to have the investment of a second home who are then, you know, facilitating a person in the community, you know, having stability. And yeah, like ADUs, it seems like, right, that's something we should allow, but also I agree, it depends on the character of each individual lot. Not every lot is going to be able to support an additional dwelling unit in addition to whatever is built there already. So I think that, you know, it's you don't need to limit them any more than the natural landscape would limit them in a particular example. And yeah, I mean, probably short term, you know, if we do need more housing here for people to live here and operate the town, so, you know, however that works, that's kind of like the thing that I would like to see more of, more affordability for the people who are working the jobs in town, staffing the stores in town, building the town when it starts to break. All those sorts of things. So that's all. Thank you.
In the common Second Street, and I have appreciated the whole process that you have gone through with the housing opening, having the open house, allowing people to give input for a long period of time, providing reports all along during the process. And I like the proposals that you've made. They seem fair because I totally agree with these folks back here that we need housing for the people who live here. The people who are the teachers, who are the policemen, who work in the restaurants, who work in public works. They don't make enough money to afford what is a rising cost of housing in this town and, you know, quite frankly, worldwide. So I think that's really important, and this is a good first step. The cap of 30 seems high, but then on the other hand, there are folks who their wealth, their sole investment is their home, and they need to have the right to be able to utilize that income in a way, that investment. So a reasonable cap. And like I said, I think 30 is probably reasonable. It's sort of disturbing that we don't know exactly how many short-term rentals there are in town. That part right there needs to be number one in addressing, is that we need to have all of those rentals on the books and we need to be collecting taxes from. As far as ADUs go, you're right that there are
a lot of properties where there's no way anybody's gonna put an ADU on that. And one of them is my property, it already has too much building on it anyway. But there are people who could. Is that?
You've got, yeah, 45 seconds.
Anyway, I just want to say I'm in support and I really have valued the input from all the folks.
That's.
I'm Walter Chuck, and mostly just have to say I appreciate the work that's being done. It certainly needed to be addressed. And there are the problems that, I don't know some of the details that will be worked out in the final legislation of this. And I probably would have more of a comment on the final draft of any regulations that come out. And I might put in my 2 cents for that.
And he's passed out. Shereen, in Payon. I have a property, I've always proposed or pushed the idea of ADUs since a long time, even before the rise in STRs. So I always thought it was a better idea. It could be short-term or long-term, doesn't matter. Owner-occupied building on the property or not, that shouldn't matter either. I have a property, I leave for long periods of time, I leave my home empty, or I rent a room, or a caretaker in the house while theoretically having somebody in an ADU, or 2 ADUs on the same property, that's fine. I'm not a fan of STRs at all. There's plenty of STRs right around the perimeter of Payon. I don't know, that's, you really need to have STRs. Okay, that's it. One other thing, just the least amount of regulation on people's personal private property, put that up.
Bill Brunner on Second Street here in Payon. Yeah, a lot to cover. Just a quick note, in terms when you're talking about basically an amnesty for people that have existing uses that are sort of prohibited in the existing code. And the code's very clear in terms of uses. Anything that's not specifically allowed is defined as prohibited. And I think passing out amnesty to people that are currently doing things that are not technically in line with the code is questionable, and maybe it's appropriate to some degree. But I think if we're going to be handing out licenses for things, it shouldn't be a blanket amnesty. There should be at least some of the licenses are with a lottery or something like that. And I would suggest all of the licenses should have a sunset cap on them of 3 or 5 years. When we're talking about who can live in various places, I think that working is important. I think fixed income people should be specifically included as the definitions and stuff. The thing that is the most fundamental to me is we happen to have a water moratorium. It does not prohibit specifically ADUs because we weren't talking about it when that came about. I don't understand how density can be increased without increasing the load on the water system. We're currently doing another study, but I think there should be an explicit acknowledgement that the best available data indicates we're really close, maybe a little bit over the firm yield of the water system without some really expensive or creative fixes. And I think that it's a mistake to think we have to wait 4 years for another study when we know it's going to come out 1 of 3 ways. We're either not going to have enough water, we're going to have just enough water, or we're going to have water to sell. I think it's a mistake to wait until a study like that comes back in 4 years to sit down and figure out what are we going to do with each one of those eventualities. And I think we should be doing that at this level in planning throughout this entire master plan process.
Awesome. Did we miss anybody or did anybody join online?
I'm a resident, so I'm taking off my town administrator hat and I'm putting on my resident hat. So there's a few things that I want you guys to consider, while you're making these ordinances. Number one, we can't extend any service lines until the water moratorium, the conditions of the water moratorium have been lifted. So even though we're doing this and putting it in place, I'm not going to process a permit for an extension of a water line. It's just not going to happen. But aside from that, I think it is appropriate to have a cap on STRs. I think it's also appropriate to have it in any zoning area. But I do want to emphasize that if you do a licensing fee for those licenses, it's an annual fee. It's not 4 or 5 years, it's annual. Because it will take a staff time and I think so not only staff time to administer that part of the code, but also for enforcement software. So there is an annual software I've used in the past for regulating STRs that I think having this license fee address that would be really good. With ADUs, I would be very cautious about grandfathering for non-conformities. So what I mean by that is if somebody's encroaching in a setback, we're going to allow that to be an ADU or turned into a short-term rental. I don't think that would be appropriate. If it's going to go to that STR way of things and they're already encroaching on like an alley setback, that's hard to enforce. And then I can say this by saying I live near an STR, a short-term rental. And I would love it if all of them were SCI students, but they're not. So this early fall, we had one really sketchy situation that resulted in I didn't call, but resulted in police activity. So I just want you to be aware of that as well. And I'll stop myself.
You're cut off. That's great. Well, thank you guys. That I feel like was really helpful and you guys were all like super respectful of time. So thanks for like being succinct and getting to it. Let's start up here. Does anybody want to start in particular?
Why don't we just go around the same way?
Perfect.
Okay, wait a clarify. Am I timing you?
Yes.
I'm going to play a little bit of the devil's advocate here. I've been reading a lot of the stuff that's come up. Most importantly, before I do that, I want to say that I really am in support of trying to figure out some way to have affordable housing. I think it's absolutely necessary. I'm not 100% sure that all the things that we're talking about are actually going to do that. I just want people to take a moment to think about it. 30 STRs in this town are not making that big of a difference. Okay. Additionally, ADUs, if you go ahead and build them and you allow 800 square feet, I will tell you from a contractor's perspective, it's going to cost probably $200,000 to build one. At $2.50 a foot, which is reasonable. Right? And what that means is that there's going to be a mortgage on that of about $1,400 to $1,500 a month based on the current mortgage stuff. Okay. Just to put it into perspective so that we're thinking about this in very real terms. Now, in this day and age, maybe $1,400 is reasonable. $1,500 is reasonable. I'm not sure that's the way a lot of people think about that at this point in time. The other part of this is the fact that what's driving this mostly is really the market for real estate. Okay, I know my house has gone up in value like crazy since I bought it, right? But the reality is that hardly anybody can afford, at least people who are here just working on farms and as support people and service people, cannot afford to buy a home in this neck of the woods. Now, the benefit, what I will say in a positive way, the more available housing in terms of things that are built, that means there's going to be more potential on the market, which will perhaps, I'm not saying it will, but it could lower the overall cost because there's more availability of more stuff. I'll just leave it at that.
Well,
My major concern on all of this is health and safety. I know for a fact that we have ADUs that are not up to code. I've been in them. I work on EMS, and I've been in some that frankly terrify me. They should not be allowed to be that way. If we approve ADUs, we need to make sure that every single one of them is inspected and every single one of them is health and safety compliant. And that means that they have smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, they have adequate wiring. I actually saw one where they had extension cords in a garage under rugs, and I almost fainted. That we're asking for a disaster. The other thing is that we do need to address the fact that this is adding a load to our water and sewer situation. Now, we have plenty of sewer capacity, but we don't have water capacity. It behooves us to pay attention to this. And part of the way that we pay for improvements and building of our system is by the tap fee. And I truly believe that if you're going to have an ADU, that you need to pay water and sewer taps, because that's how we build and maintain our system. And we put Band-Aids on this system for the last at least 35 years that I've lived here. And we're paying for it now by increased fees and increased problems. So that has to be addressed. We also have to look at, there are many, many ADUs in this town that have not paid water tap fees. They haven't paid water fees since they've been in service. We also collect garbage at all these places. That costs us money. We need to make sure that everybody pays their fair share, and that's where we need to go. And as far as STRs go, I love the idea of a cap. The cap needs to be instituted, but we also need to license them. It's a business, and it needs to be licensed, and the fee needs to go and pay for itself. And if we need some regulations so that if it becomes a problem, that license can be removed. And that's all I've got to say.
I appreciate your comments. I do agree with some of what Rick is saying. Suzanne Watson. Aside from that, okay, so the STRs sound like kind of the most pressing thing right now because they're not quite so rate restricted with the water. I really think, well, there are some changes that you suggested, like permitting dwelling units on page 16 of 32 as part of a business use in the commercial core. And right now it says special review. So when you say dwelling units as part of a business use, are we talking about STRs downtown or permitted outright? Because the problem with dwelling units downtown is we need a little bit more guidance on that in our code. I mean, are you going to allow them in storefronts, or do they have to be upstairs? Is there a certain percentage of square footage? I always thought the secondary use for dwelling units as part of a secondary business use, that was for the traditional mom and pop living in the store, or if you had an employee that you wanted to house. That was the intent of that, but I'm not sure that's how it's being done now, because business owners basically just want to maximize the profit on their property. So are we talking about, I want more clarification about how long-term rentals or in short-term rentals downtown looks, so it doesn't conflict with the retail businesses. I agree, this lot coverage is a concern to me. I don't want to see overly developed lots. I think we have an obligation to keep our microclimate cool here. And the more paved surfaces, the more roofs that you put in, the more trees that you cut down so you can put an ADU in, it's going to have an impact on our local climate. And I think we have an obligation to protect our climate. Maybe you can't cut down a healthy tree on your property to put an ADU there, for instance. Okay. I think that we have to be careful because the people who always take advantage of these things are like developers. So I think we'll see developers come in and maximize what they can on the lots. So we have to be careful of that. Height restrictions, there definitely needs to be height restrictions and considering slopes. And I think that things need to be done by special review. It might be allowed, but you have to have a special review for ADUs. And there'll be certain criteria that you really, so people know how to prepare and know what the parameters are. And then I just want to make the point that I'm afraid this might drive the cost of property and homes up in Paonia because the more buildings you put on a property, the more valuable it is. And it's going to make property ownership actually more unaffordable in certain areas. So just keep that in mind too. Thank you.
I'm wondering if we should have a criteria for how the licenses go out, but that's a good way to be able to control that we have locals, those types of things. And so actually develop a criteria, like a scoring sheet for when the licenses come in. I'm wondering if we could also require a certain number of ADUs in a year. In other words, you can cap it formally that way and not just let it go willy-nilly. Although I think Steve's comments about the cost of that's why originally I only did 7. I've heard a lot about both sides of this issue from the people here, and no matter what kind of decisions can be made, there's going to be some people that are mad about it. So I hope the people that are making decisions just kind of try to make a decision for the best interest of the community. Understand that there are going to be some people who disagree with that. That's just the way it goes. STRs, one person brought up the point that STRs support family, and I'm one of those because we live in a 720 square foot house. So when family come, they either sleep on our couch where our living room, dining room, kitchen is, or else we get them an STR. So we usually get them an STR. I want to thank Shay and Andrew for the work that they've done on this. This is really professional. It's well conducted, and I really appreciate that. And if there are people here in the room today that were part of the housing task force, could you please raise your hand? Because I want to thank you for the work. So it's Linda. Okay, yeah. So remember. I really like the comments we've had about the dark skies. Thank you, Andrew, for showing up and reinforcing that, because that's really important. A lot of density can really impact that. And Suzanne's comments about the climate and the canopy that we need in order to keep this cold. And then the last thing, I want to put in a shameless plug for Saturday from 10:30 to 11:30. There's a flyer in the back. One of the answers to the cost of housing here is a community land trust. And we have formed the Fertile Edge Community Land Trust here so it can hold land and people can build their houses on it. So it keeps the cost low. We're going to have a session at the library on Saturday from 10:30 to noon. We invite everyone to come. There's also flyers in the back. Thanks. Done with shameless plug.
Okay. I appreciate all the comments that were given. I'm so glad that everybody came and made comments. Thank you very much for showing that. I have some questions about, there are STRs in this community that would not be long-term rentals. And so it seems to me that if we're going to license STRs, we should prioritize those that are not appropriate for long-term rentals. So it would be, an offsite office that doesn't have full kitchen facilities or something like that. And then keep the houses, the bigger houses, for long-term rentals versus short-term rentals. And incentivize those in some way. And I'm not sure how we do that, but I think that's a great idea. I also think I don't like the idea of having ADUs as short-term rentals. If you're going to build an ADU, then it needs to be a longer-term rental and have something in the code that would talk about that. The renting of rooms. I see that as really, really hard to regulate. However, it does provide a service. as somebody mentioned, SEI classes. We have a lot of people who come through here on very short things that just need a room to sleep in at night. And then they do go out and they patronize the restaurants and everything else. So if there's a way, my question with that is enforcement. You know, we can regulate it, but if we can't enforce it, there's no point in making a regulation. I like the idea of ADUs as density. I have different thoughts about the lot coverage. I think 30% lot coverage is not much. And maybe lift that a little bit so that we can incentivize some ADU, people buying ADUs. Water is an issue, but again, let's charge for water taps. We may not need to put another hole in the main pipe for a water tap, but we can definitely charge it for water. That's what I.
Can I offer one more thing? This is me with my town administrator head on. So for like an ADU, instead of it being a tap, I would rather recover the entire cost of the meter and installing the second meter. I think that's an important clarification.
Hello, my name's Kathy and I live on 4th Street, maybe the smallest lot in Paonia. We're definitely no ADU about. Let's see, so I think the short-term rentals, that's pretty straightforward. I agree that we should perhaps reduce the number, but I do want to acknowledge the people who rent a room in their house because they're traveling, who rent a room in their house and it allows them to stay and pay because it's that little bit of extra money that comes in. I think that's real, that's legit. Like as I sit in this trustee position, I think about unintended consequences. And what we don't want to do is create regulation that could all of a sudden someone loses that source of income and then they got to get forced out. So a little bit of flexibility there, I think could be helpful. I really appreciate the emphasis on local and trying to do things to keep hedge funds and folks like that from purchasing property and paying it. That's not what we want to do for our community. And though it is not I think the idea of addressing STRs, though it won't provide a lot of relief for affordable housing, it's a start. It's maybe we can get a few extra people can get places to live in. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take these incremental efforts to really address the problem and attacking it from all angles. Yeah, ADUs, that's where it gets interesting. And I definitely am thinking about the water moratorium and that nothing can happen until we understand that. And then also, as others have alluded to, just making sure, I want to encourage it, but I want to encourage whatever town does that we encourage affordable long-term rentals. So if there's things that we can do, that would be my preference, but I don't know what that looks like yet, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And I really appreciate that everyone gets a chance to speak.
My name's Lynn. I live on Minnesota Avenue. I'm probably one of the bigger lots in town. Thank you so much, Shay, and please thank Andrew also. And thank you, everybody, for all the input, because I agree with so much of it, and some of it's so conflicting too, and I still agree with it. So I definitely, I look at an 800 square foot house on some of these lots in town, and it's just not happening. So I do think there has to be a percentage of the lot can be covered. And I really think setbacks are very important. I know what's happening in California is they've kind of rolled back some of their restrictions on setbacks in order to allow ADUs. And now it's just creating a nightmare in neighborhoods because houses are just going right up against the property lines, and families are moving in. And what's really crazy is I saw on Facebook today that somebody has 160 square foot shed for rent for $900 a month in
Grand Junction or some area, and he can't answer all the phone calls he's getting. So, you know, it is definitely an issue, and it's a very touchy issue. I really think enforcement is critical, and it's going to be a hard one. I know, I agree with Aaron, of course. I'm also on the Dark Sky group, and I see that we have people ever since the ordinance have come in are stringing up all these new lights, and they're solar, so they're on all night long, and there's no enforcement. So it's like we really have to look at what can we actually enforce and be realistic about it, and possibly some of these fees can go towards, you know, water infrastructure and go towards enforcement. I don't like the idea. I agree with you, the grandfathering in existing things that aren't safe. I think that's a real disaster. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paige and I live on Delta Avenue, and I am one of those people that has ADU in my backyard that was a carriage house. It was probably built in 1910. So, and then we bought the property next door, which has a single house on it, but there was certainly room for an ADU. So, and that we kind of figured we would do that eventually. So, but I wouldn't be living in the house next door. I'd be at my current house. So we don't want to have people like me not do an ADU on a property that I could potentially do it on when there's a water tap available. So I just took a quick look of all the short-term rentals through all 4 different of the platforms. And I made sure that I looked at each individual unit to be sure it was in town, and I found 16, and I put in for the 4th of July weekend. So I don't know if there still are 30, but we have to be sure that they're in town, because we cannot do anything about those. There are plenty that say Paonia, but when you look into it, they are on the mesas around here. So I would like to see a little less than 30. I think we do have to regulate STRs, and all of this is going to be a huge balancing act. It's going to take time to get this all figured out. And I look at the moratorium as in our favor to do this right. We're going to have time to think about it. And I agree, I don't think ADUs should be allowed by right. I think there's too many lots where that could affect the neighbors. I think we really do have to think about what the setbacks are. Is it going to work? And all that needs to be put in here. I think in a more flexible manner. I mean, let me take that back. I think we have to be very clear how close these buildings can be to an existing building in the neighbor building. And I've been walking around the neighborhoods, and there's some places you really could not put in a second building and have it work for the people that live in the neighborhood. And I think it's important that we do require certain design concepts so that it matches our town, because we do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and have plenty of people living in small homes, but we lose the character of this beautiful town that we all live here for. And let's see, I think at this point, that's it for me. Well, hey, what do you know?
Trustee Valentine does have his hand raised. He wants to say something, but if you do see something that needs code enforcement, we are not actively going out looking. We rely on reports coming into us. So if you see like the dark skies lights that aren't compliant, send us that. I have a light meter. I can go out and or have an officer go out that has been calibrated, so it is enforceable. So and you can do that by text my gov. Watch out. Okay, Trustee Valentine, you're on.
Very good. I'm coming through?
Yes.
Okay. It's excellent comments. This is really, I think this whole process is moving us forward nicely. And there isn't really too much to add. I thank the whole housing group for doing what they've done and for this presentation. It was really good to see that there's a lot of congruency between the presentation and proposed ideas and the public comments. That's always reassuring. In particular, I liked the couple of different comments to the same effect that limiting STRs and promoting, increasing, advocating tourism are not counterposed. that we have to have a place for the people who service that, economic sector to live and to be there to do it. So there's the connection. All right, thank you.
Last.
You don't want to comment on your own presentation?
That was so good. Here, here.
That's such a good job.
Okay, as comments were said, my list has kind of been whittled, which is great. I think a couple of the things that haven't been said yet, I see the addition of STRs and the addition of density there is an inherent pro and con in that we as a community would allow extra density so long as that density serves the community. And so I think that allowing STRs in ADUs that go in doesn't necessarily kind of flow with that pro and con. And so when we are talking about STRs, I think really what we should be talking about is what actually serves this community. Can we regulate no STRs and ADUs? I'm not quite sure, but I really think that has to be part of that conversation. As far as the licenses, as people were talking about kind of a lower cap, I have a curiosity if we put a time limit on the quote unquote first wave of licenses and to see how many actually come in within a 2 or 3 month period, that might actually set our cap naturally. If it's under 30, then we just cap it at that first wave. If there are over 30, I would probably recommend instituting some sort of lottery system so it's not just first come, first serve. Although I would be worried about how many licenses we would grant to a specific individual. So if there's one person with 4 properties, does that person get 1 license or does that person get a full 1/6 of all of the licenses in this town? Kind of connected to STRs, I'd be curious to see at what point our other lodging opportunities were at capacity. I'm curious to see if our STRs are full, are all of our other lodging opportunities also full, right? So if we lower the amount of STRs, then that money actually goes to places like the local nomad or the other options that may actually be sitting at half capacity. I think one of the pieces that hasn't been part of the conversation so far is the level of trust between current renting pool and current landlord pool. I think a lot of landlords in this town has been burned by renters doing inappropriate things with their property. And I think that conversation really needs to be addressed if we are limiting the amount of STRs and kind of forcing landlords to go back onto the long-term renters market. Because that's, and then ADUs, if and or when we allow ADUs, I think we should be focusing our attention on bringing the current population of ADUs up to code and into compliance before we start adding more of them. Thanks.
Awesome. Sorry, let me just finish my thought here. This is great, you guys. Thank you for taking the time and listening. It's so helpful to go through and hear the different ideas and opinions because guaranteed someone's thinking of something you're not thinking about. A couple kind of clarifications that I just want to offer is kind of questions that I heard come up. The full action plan is on the town's website. Someone mentioned that, so the whole thing's available. I only picked out a couple pages because I was giving you the whole zoning code and thought I'd reduce your load. The dark sky, that ordinance wouldn't change. So if you already have a lumen density cap, it would be the same, even if you increase density. So that wouldn't be affected, which is really nice. That you have that cap, and the light trespass rules, none of that would change. There's no proposal for that. And just so you guys know, the way that this works, and sorry if I'm repeating stuff, when an ordinance is adopted, it gets added into your existing rules. So it's not like something gets removed or taken away unless we're proposing to remove it, which is shown in the ordinance. So all of that lighting stuff would remain the same. And that's probably a really good example of an ordinance that's hard to enforce. Every time someone strings up some patio lights, that's against the rules. That's really difficult to enforce. So I think that's what we're trying to avoid here. Now I understand that's for dark sky certification. They set their standards. It's very complicated, but we're trying to make it easier. Think about this. We're kind of doing two different things here. So for short-term rentals, we'd be adding regulations, right? We're saying maybe there's a cap, there's certain things you can and can't do. With this ADU conversation, we're allowing more flexibility. So we're basically removing a restriction from your property right now and allowing more. So again, this kind of goes to the balance conversation we've had of, yeah, we are adding some rules, but we're also adding more flexibility, which is really nice. Now, instead of saying you can't have an ADU on your property, sorry, Paige, there's that carriage house, too bad.
No, that's there for. That one's not good.
So, there is a little bit of both going on here. So hopefully that feels like an okay balance. There's a general kind of rule of thumb with housing that adding housing options in a town helps with general affordability. So like what you were saying about construction costs and how much you charge, but then you kind of said, well, but units on the market can really help. And that is generally the rule that we find in the housing world. Even if really fancy houses are built, often that means people who are in a little bit of a less fancy house move to the fancy house and open that opportunity up. And then that kind of keeps going. So options are really just helpful in a community with limited options. Whether what is being created is super affordable or not, that helps. A couple items. So on short-term rentals, one way to think about this is creating rules for short-term rentals by creating regulations kind of are disincentivizing it. So in my practice, I have seen people say, are you kidding me? I have to come to the town and pay my couple $100 and get a license. I'm out. I'm done. So, or I have to have a parking spot, or I have to actually be a dwelling unit. I can't be a barn or a garage converted into something. I need to be a legal dwelling unit and meet basic health and safety. But they would be out with what's proposed today.
Or a 24-hour registered agent contact.
Or a registered agent. So, I mean, you are disincentivizing it just by adding some regulations. It's just tweaking which ones you want to add or not add. I did hear, I think I heard a lot of support of treating maybe the one bedroom differently than all the others. And that's something easy to do, of not count it towards the license cap, but still track it, maintain it, have some other stuff apply to it. It is the owner or owner agent within 15 miles. I did want to clarify. So the idea is that if you had a short-term rental, so I live here, I have a house, but I visit just for like cherry days and other cool things. I couldn't be the person responsible for that party. I would need to hire you to be my agent and, be my person who could get the phone call. So it's not necessarily requiring the owner, but the owner would have to hire someone to represent them and be that agent. Another thing that does kind of discourage people from doing short-term rentals, because it's a little bit of their profit that goes away to pay someone to do that. But it can also really help address those community issues or those neighbor issues that come up and feel really bad for residents. We didn't have a lot of comments about not allowing short-term rentals at all, but that is questionably legal to do. There are communities doing it. They are being challenged. I don't know that any rulings have come out on that. I would not encourage you guys to do that, because then you'll get tied up in those legal challenges and that will cost more of your money. And I don't feel like that's worth it. The tax question, I did hear that come up. It sounds like that's something the community probably wants to talk about. I'm hoping later. That is a big discussion, and what you're legally allowed to do would take some research and work. We could also try to do something where you set the cap low And if all of a sudden you get a bunch of applications and a bunch of, outraged people wanting licenses, you could have the discussion about making it higher. So I felt like I heard a lot of support for maybe lowering that, and that could be another approach. You can't really say that they can go to locals first, unfortunately, or prioritize them. I think I can say this because I'm not your legal counsel or your town administrator, but you could publicize them locally first before you really try to get the word out, to out-of-town owners. These people in the room know that they would need a license, so you would be the first people to be in line as you apply for those licenses. In the proposal, the licenses right now would be good for 2 years. That could be something that could be adjusted to a year, 3 years, whatever you want. 2 years seem like a nice amount of time where it's not quite as an administrative burden where it's every single year, but some communities really like to check in every single year.
Software as a service is charged annually, so.
Sure. Yeah, that could be a good way. And then fees for the license would also go toward enforcement. So that, like, when calculating the administrative fee, you would want to not just say the initial part of setting up the license, inspecting the house, but also to enforce that. And you would assume a couple hours for every unit throughout the year, or maybe more if it's 2 years. So for ADUs, it sounds like there is a big need to create standards because there are so many that already exist. That this is a way to get them to be legal and healthy and safety, or health and safety concerns addressed. It's really unfortunate when a community has to wait until like a massive disaster to get those kinds of rules in place and address that kind of stuff. So it sounds good that we're talking about this. To be clear, accessory dwelling units are a dwelling unit. They would have to comply with all regulations that current building has to comply with. They would follow the International Building Code or Residential Code. They would follow the setbacks, the height limits, all of the rules that are in place today. Let's see. Okay, address that. I think that is all. I hope I addressed some of the questions or confusion that came up during the conversation. Any last thoughts before I kind of wrap it up? Yeah.
One, which is I really want to thank everybody who showed up tonight. Quite often we're sitting up here and there's nobody here. And that doesn't help us make any kind of decisions that are meaningful. I mean, not that they aren't meaningful, but it doesn't help us really kind of gauge the community's, interest and response and try to make decisions that incorporate their interests. So, and to do it as respectfully as we did tonight was really, really refreshing. So I just wanted to put that out there.
So I think the International Building Code that we have adopted kind of dictates the minimum house size that can be built. The most current International Building Code, which we haven't adopted, but you could always adopt the chapter, you don't have to adopt the whole thing, does have rules about tiny homes. And so I think that would be a really important thing to maybe incorporate into our code as we get closer to seeing ADUs as a reality. I also kind of want to know, so can you let us know kind of where we're at? It sounds like there's going to have to be some amendments to the ADU thing in here. Also some STR sounds like it was maybe a little bit more amenable. So where are we at? And is the next meeting where you're going to show revisions or?
You queued me up perfectly. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. So I am hopeful to get any written comments. So if you're like me and you kind of need to process when you get home and you think of something later that you really want to share, feel free to email me. My email's up here. You can also email staff if that's okay, and they'll forward it to me, or just bring a written comment to town hall. They'll get it to me. I am hoping to close that in about a week. So you have until the end of the day on the 26th. We just don't have forever to deal with this. So please give me any written comments, thoughts, things you didn't get addressed. If you talk to other community members that weren't here that want to participate, feel free to submit those comments, or they can submit those comments. I will then be adjusting the proposed language for what I heard. So keep in mind, I can't satisfy everybody's comments. They don't all comply with each other. They won't all work together. I will do the best I can to go through and kind of process what we talked about tonight and see what we're going to do for the next workshop. So it might be another listening session. It might be that we pick out a couple topics to really hash out, but I need to process that and see what might be most productive. But I will be adjusting that language and coming up with a plan for another joint work session. We are looking at April 8th or 11th, and you should have a doodle poll in your email inbox today if you haven't already seen it to get that scheduled. So please attend if you can, April 8th or 11th. We'll get that info published soon and try to follow up with everyone. And then we'll be able to adjust it one more time. And my hope is at that point, the third meeting that I have here is an ordinance in front of the board to consider.
Can you tell us what day 8th or 11th is?
Like what day of the week?
Yeah.
Monday and Thursday.
Monday, and what times are you?
5 to 7.
5 to 7. It would be nice if we're a little after 5. It's hard to get off of work and try to eat something and get ready to come down here. Maybe 5:30, 5:15.
Answer the doodle poll, because I think that's part of.
I don't have email
time
for you. I don't
Okay,
have.
do you want to just stay for a second after and we'll get your times?
Thank you.
Okay.
So you can also email comments to paonia@townofpaonia.com. Accept those as well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, well, I really appreciate everyone coming and talking through this and having a nice conversation. It's the only way you can sort these hard topics out. So thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you next time, I hope.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Very good. On the nose. That was impressive.
You know what? I didn't
Those.